about it. I always want to welcome those that are live streaming and watching us tonight. And we're always glad you're there and listening. Sometimes I forget that you're there, but I want you to know that we are glad that you're with us each night. We kind of got into the 12th verse of chapter 2, and we had been, the thing that we need to keep in mind, that chapter 1, starting about the middle of the chapter down through the end of it, was directed especially to the Gentiles. I think it's from verse 18 down through 32. Paul was writing directly to or about the Gentiles. Beginning in chapter 2, it's to the Jews, and actually it's to the non-Christian Jews. And I know he's writing it to the church in Rome, but you can see that he is trying to teach the non-Christian Jews about Jesus in this, especially when we get to verse 16. But we did verse 12 last time, but I didn't get finished with it. So we go back to verse 11, for there is no respect of persons with God. And that is so true. God has always loved mankind. He's loved all men, for God so loved the world. And he has never meant for anybody to be left out so that they couldn't go to heaven. That has never been his intention. When folks think that when the Jews were, during the Mosaical law, when the people were under the Mosaical law, that they were the only ones going to heaven. But that's just simply not true. God has never been a respecter of just one race. He's always loved everybody. When we look at verse 12, it says, for as many as have sinned without law shall also perish without law, and as many as have sinned in the law shall be judged by the law. Now that is the law of Moses. Most of the time in the book of Romans, when it says the word law, generally it is talking about the law of Moses. And here is no difference. It says, for many have sinned without the law of Moses, shall also perish without the law of Moses. If they've sinned, they're going to perish, whether they're in the law or not. And so it's not saying there that just because you don't have the law of Moses, or you're not under the law of Moses, that you're going to perish. It says if you have sinned. But then it says, as many have sinned in the law shall be judged by the law. Let me ask a question. In the very beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and he put man here. What was the law that he gave men at that time, men and women? Did he give them a law? Yes. What was it? Not to eat the forbidden fruit. That's exactly right. So we know that God has always, even with the first man, he has had a law for man to follow. We look at Cain and Abel. Did God have a law for them? You know, they sinned, didn't they? They sinned in their worship. And if they sinned in their worship, did God not have a law that he told them how to worship? God would never have not liked anybody's worship if he hadn't told them how he wanted them to worship. So we know that he did. And then we know that God didn't like murder because he sent Cain away because of that. So God had laws even in the very beginning. We get to chapter 6 of Genesis, and we know that the world had become so wicked that God was going to put a flood upon the earth to destroy everybody. And how could they be wicked if there was no, if God had not had some laws? He would have had nothing to judge them by, to know that they were wicked, if he had not given laws out there. And he knew that they were against these laws. They were so bad that he only found Noah and his family that he could save. And if we notice that, if we get on over about chapter 8, we'll find that as soon as they were safe on the ground, God went to Noah, and he set up a brand new covenant with Noah and his family. And one of the things that he points out is murder, killing a human being was something that would not be allowed. And of course, he said he would never destroy the earth by water, by rain again. When we continue on, we see that Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all of these were under a law. And the law that they were under was called the patriarchal law. And that law continued on right up to Jesus' death. You see, when Moses took the children of Israel out of Egypt, then he began the law of Moses. And if you look at Deuteronomy 5, it'll teach you that the law of Moses was only for the Jews, only for them. The Gentiles could not be saved by the law of Moses because they were not amenable to that law. Only the Jews were amenable to that law. So all the Gentiles that lived from that time on, that lived according to the law, the patriarchal law, would be able to go to heaven because their sins would be removed when Jesus died. At Jesus' death, his blood would cleanse their sins back to those that were under the patriarchal law, as well as those that are under Mosaical law. If they lived according to the Mosaical law, when they died, and then when Jesus died, his blood would go back and cleanse them. That same blood is what cleanses us today. But we are under the law of Christ today. We're not under the Mosaical law. We're not amenable to the Mosaical law. The law of Moses, the Old Testament law, all the laws that's in there, we're not amenable to them. We don't have to follow them. But we do have to follow the New Testament, the law of Christ. We're going to see that a little bit clearer in a minute, I hope. Any questions about that? Is everybody understand that? Okay. And that's important as we study the book of Romans, you're going to see. For not the hearers of the law are just before God, but the doers of the law shall be justified. Now, here it's talking about the law of Moses. For those that are here are not justified, but the doers, the ones that do what the law of Moses said. That also goes true for the patriarchal law. Those that obey the patriarchal law, the Gentiles that did that, as long as they're doing it and not just hearing the law, then they are justified. Verse 14, for when the Gentiles which have not the law do by nature the things contained in the law, these having not the law are a law unto themselves, which show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness, and their thoughts the mean, while accusing or excusing or defending one another. Here's talking about the Gentiles again, and it says that which have not the law, not the law of Moses, but if they do the things contained in the law, if they obey the law, then they are a law unto themselves, because they don't have a law that is written down for them, but they show the work of the law written in their hearts. Now, when we talk about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, you say Abraham, these folks passed the laws down to their son. It passed down from father to son, from that son when he became a father down to his children. So those were the patriarchal laws that passed right on down. And they were not written down. The law of Moses, what happened on Mount Sinai with Moses? Do what? Okay. Was that written on Moses' heart? Written on stones. The law of Moses was written. It was written on the stones as far as the Ten Commandments, but then it had more than just the Ten Commandments where God talked to Moses and gave them, and then they tried to make it better and added to it and made it worse. But the law of Moses itself was written down. But the patriarchal law was written in their heart. It was written in their heart, and that caused them to have a conscience. And because of that conscience, they obeyed the law that they were amenable to. And that's what it's talking about here. And then it says that the thoughts of mean while accusing or defending one another. What that is that if they're obeying the law of Moses, then their law defends them. If they're not obeying the law, not the law of Moses, but the patriarchal law, then the law accuses them. If we get to the 3rd chapter of Romans, when we get there, we're going to find out that the Bible teaches us, or Paul writes by the Holy Spirit, that in order to, let me make sure I get this right, in order to know what sin is, the law only is what determines what sin is. In other words, if there was no law to tell you what is a sin, then you wouldn't know what the sin was. And so the law actually defends you if you're obeying it, and it accuses you if you're not obeying it. And that's true of us today. As long as we obey the law of Christ, then that law will defend us. But if we disobey the law of Christ, it will accuse us. And we'll see that in a minute when we get to verse 16. Well, we are at verse 16. Any questions, comments? The entire law did not apply to the Gentiles. That's exactly right. The law of Moses, they were not amenable to the law of Moses at all. Thank you, Cecil. It only applied to the Jews at that time. Actually, they became Judah toward the end, and they were not even called Jews, but it was the children of Israel and on forward. Yes. I'll refer it to him if it is. Would he be saved?
Would he be saved? And the same thing for Gentiles during the law of Moses. Now, I see where it addresses that.
Yeah.
These verses, that a Gentile could abide by the law of Moses and be saved.
Or he could just abide by the patriarchal law and be saved. True. Yeah. But as far as knowing, I know one verse in 1 Thessalonians 1:7 where it talks about if you don't know God and obey not the God.
Somebody who has not had access to the law today, the New Testament law, will they be saved, separate and apart? The answer to that question is no, they will not. Two reasons. Number one, we have a responsibility to carry the gospel in all the world. Number two, according to Colossians chapter 2, the gospel at one time was revealed to the entire world. And those who know not God today, their ancestors at one time or the other have refused God. They've rejected God, and they're suffering the consequences of those actions.
I understand that.
Okay?
I'm talking basically prior to Mosaic law, prior to Mount Sinai.
So is your question in regards to the Gentile, were they saved separate apart from law or what?
No,
I don't understand what your question is.
he's asking if what his question is that if a person does like they're supposed to, they live a good, clean life, you know, and but they have never known God at all in that period of time. They're not a Jew, but they're a Gentile, but they have never known God, but they still live a good life, good enough that if they had been a Jew or, you know, if they had known God, they'd definitely be going to heaven. Would they go to heaven? Is that right?
know there were only 8 of them at the time of the ark.
Noah.
Mm-hmm.
Time of Noah. So that's too good of
One of them messed up.
I think my answer would be go to Hebrews chapter 11 and look at the first, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, through 17. You get all the way down to 23. 1 through 22. It says, and I quote, by faith Abel did such and such. By faith Enoch, verse 5. By faith Noah, verse 7. By faith Abraham, verse 8. Faith, and the term there implies or infers, whichever word you want, that they were taught law and they obeyed. And I think that law was taught that every Gentile or every Gentile had access to that law. And if they're not saved, it's because they rejected God's law. Thank you. Is there a yes or no? What is the question? I will tell you if there's a yes or no. I answered that yes, the Gentiles had to obey God's law to be saved.
I'm looking for a verse, but anyway, I might come back with something on that too,
And that's not
Paul.
That's not what I'm talking about.
One time there's this man that he was a very, very great speaker, like some of our audience here that had a lot of knowledge, and it was in science. I mean, he knew science front and back, and he made these big speeches at different places where there were large crowds, and he was really wanted by many people to come make his speeches. And he had this chauffeur that drove for him all the time. Y'all may have heard this, I don't know. And that chauffeur, he had heard his speeches so many times that he could quote him. He could quote everything he said. He could even make the speech. So he told him, he told his chauffeur, he says, tonight, won't you just get up there and make my speech for me? And he said, I'm a little scared. He said, just go on up there and make my speech for me. So he finally talked him into it, and he got up there, and he hadn't gone long. Somebody got up there and asked a question that he couldn't answer. And he says, man, that ain't nothing than that. That is so simple, I'm going to let my chauffeur answer that question for you. So I let my chauffeur take care of that one. Right, and there's a verse, and I don't know where it is, but it seems like to me that everybody had the opportunity to have the knowledge of God some way or another. I can't find it right now, but I'll get that for you, Paul.
Brother Camp had a famous lesson, and I wish my brain would work. I can't remember the text. What? He taught the lesson, the stranger at the gate.
Mm.
And the stranger was the Gentile. And I remember when I was a student at MSOP, and he taught this lesson, and he showed how the patriarchal law and the Mosaical law coincided to the cross. pinned him down and said, Brother Young, what do you think about that? He said, I'll have to study that. And I thought, man, I wish I'd answered that way. I need to study that. But
Yeah.
that's wading off in deep water when
Yeah.
you get the patriarchal law and Mosaical law coinciding with the cross. And I don't think I had ever heard it explained that way until Brother King.
Yeah, I appreciate Ronnie's help on that, because that's. Well, the law can't. See, so the law can't save you. Jesus is right, and we're going to see that. I think in chapter 3 we will study that. Chapter 3 gets deep. It gets deep in a hurry, and I think I'm trying to run away from it. I don't know, but anyway, the next verse. Let's get it, and then I want to go over this page if we have time. In the day when God shall judge the secrets of men by Jesus Christ according to my gospel. So whenever Christ comes back, when he comes back, he is going to judge, Jesus is going to judge the secrets of men, and it'll be according to my gospel, which will be according to Jesus' gospel. Paul says my gospel, but we know from 1:16 that my gospel is Jesus' gospel. He's already told us that. And Jesus is going to judge us by that. I wonder, when Jesus comes back, we know from Romans 12:48 that he is going to be the judge. And in Revelations, it teaches us that the books were open. And I wonder what books that is. I can imagine that the books that are amenable to the Jews, that have the law of Moses in it, he'll have those there. And when he has a Jew to come before him, he'll look at him and then look according to the law of Moses. And if he has lived and been a doer, not a hearer of the law of Moses, then he will get to go to heaven. Then he has one come up that was a Gentile. And he looks there and he knows that this man is under the patriarchal law. Jesus will know, God will know, if that man has done everything according to the patriarchal law. And if he has done that, then he will get to go to heaven. If not, he will be lost. And then we will be facing Jesus, and Jesus will look at us and he'll have the New Testament. That's the book that will be open. And he'll look at us and he'll look at the record of our life, see if our book is written if our name is written in the book of life. And then he'll look and see if we have lived according to the New Testament. If we have, we'll go to heaven. If we're not, we'll be lost. It's that simple. Does that kind of clear that verse up? Okay. I want to go over this right quick, if we can. Ronnie showed this to me last week, and I said, wow, man, we're not going to have time to do much with it, but I tell you what, I'm just going to wait. We'll get this next time. We'll just start off with it because we've got about 2 or 3 minutes, and there's no way I could cover it, and I'd like to cover it in its entirety at one time. So all of you keep up with your little paper now for 2 weeks.